My husband and his friends thought it'd be funny to leave me stranded in a small Italian town after a fight. Let's see how she gets back. They laughed. I never went back. A month later, he found me in Greece, already starting over. I never thought it would get to this point when I pleaded with Nathan to cut back on his lunchtime drinking. He had been encouraged by his pals, who were college friends, having their yearly men reunion, to which I had been grudgingly invited. Ethan remarked, "She's always controlling you, man," and ordered another round when I suggested we return to our hotel. Nathan had followed me outside when I got up to go, his words sloppy but his wrath exact. Years of animosity on both sides surfaced during the quick and nasty altercation. Before getting into the driver's seat, he hissed, "Your purse has your passport, right? Then you'll figure it out. You're so smart, always telling me what to do." Complete darkness descended as reality set in. The little Italian village that had appeared so gorgeous during the day suddenly felt dangerous. My cash total was €80, $37. Not enough to get home via plane. Not nearly enough to cover a night's stay. Nathan had offered to hold my credit cards earlier when my tiny bag was overflowing, and now he had them in his wallet. A dimly lit room above a bakery with a tiny bed and a basin in the corner was the cheapest pension I could find. The old woman who escorted me to the room didn't speak English, but she gave me a sympathetic arm pat and appeared to comprehend my predicament. I stared at my phone and said to myself, he blocked me, incredulously. Nathan received 27 calls, all of which went directly to voicemail. Delivered but unanswered are text messages. I stared at my phone and whispered to myself in shock. Nathan received 27 calls, all of which went directly to voicemail. Delivered but unanswered are text messages. I gave Ethan a try. Liam comes next. Then all of Nathan's pals who had been in that vehicle, everybody is blocked. I shuddered as I recognized that this had been a planned humiliation rather than an impulse. Breaks of sleep were punctuated by optimistic phone checks and a fresh wave of worry. I had persuaded myself that this nightmare would stop before morning. I would be upset but relieved enough to move on when Nathan returned, contrite but prepared to accuse me of overreacting to his joke. We would go back to our meticulously planned life in Boston, where I was his devoted wife, and he was a well-respected architect. She had put aside her own design profession to take care of the house and social schedule. However, he did not show up. I rationed my remaining funds on the second day, purchasing only a sandwich for lunch while I strolled around the town's edge, looking at every hotel and eatery for our tour group. By nightfall, I discovered they had proceeded with their intended itinerary, heading to Florence without me. A nice cafe owner saw me hanging about outside his place on the third day and gave me a free espresso and instructions to the local police station in terrible English. It was as though abandoned tourists were commonplace, and the officer there didn't seem astonished by my account. But all I got was a filed report and a sympathetic nod because of his poor English and my non-existent Italian. I made the most difficult decision of my life that day. As I stood in front of a little pawn shop window, I took off my wedding ring, which Nathan had upgraded from the simple band we had started with to a 2-carat diamond on our 5th anniversary. Although the store gave me much less than it was worth, I was still able to pay for the next leg of my travel, wherever that may be. America. As he counted out euros, the pawnbroker recommended calling relatives. I gave a robotic nod, but on the inside, another strategy was taking shape. Family required an explanation. Meant listening to my mom say, "I told you so," regarding Nathan's outburst. Meant having to deal with friends who had noticed the flaws in our marriage that I had worked so hard to hide. When I got to the bus station, all was silent. Destinations I had only heard about in travel magazines were shown on its electronic board. An overnight trip to Rome that had connections to ferries, other buses, and locations. Nathan and his buddies wouldn't consider searching for me, should they ever decide to do so. In my contacts, my finger lingered on my father's name. He would wire money for a journey home with only one call. I would go back to the life I had created, where I had gradually shrunk myself to fit Nathan's growing needs and ego with only one phone call. Something came to mind. When I considered going back to interior design employment, Nathan joked that I was hiding my portfolios. Why make things more difficult? He had inquired, I need you to concentrate on our lives, and we don't need the money. Back then, I had shrugged it off. However, I saw it as just another fence in the enclosure he had constructed around me while I was seated in that filthy station. Where do you go? After observing me gaze at the departure board for almost 20 minutes, the ticket agent, an elderly woman with gentle eyes, inquired. Greece, I said. As I talked, the decision solidified. The farthest coastal village you can get me to, I said. I staggered off the last bus of my trip 14 hours later, my body rigid from the tension and terrible seats. As I admired the whitewashed structures of a village whose name I couldn't pronounce, I was greeted by the scent of olive groves and salt air. Somewhere between countries, my phone's battery failed. I was so hungry that my stomach was empty, and I felt a lot of pressure from what I had done or what had been done to me. I went toward what seemed to be the town center, the edges of my eyesight blurred with exhaustion. I was raw after 3 days of emotional whiplash, fluctuating between wrath at Nathan, anxiety for my future, and a weird, unexpected flash of something that felt dangerously close to freedom. Maybe I could stay for 2 nights in the cheapest room I could locate with the remaining euro. I didn't have a strategy after that. No companion. Only please and thank you are used in the local language. However, a sense of peace that I hadn't had in years descended upon me as I watched the sunset turn the Aegean waves pink and gold. I was supposed to learn about dependence from Nathan. Rather, he had unintentionally released me. The further I ventured from the hamlet, the harsher the Greek sun became. Inside useless footwear designed for sightseeing rather than hiking, my feet blistered. The world was tilting around me because of the mix of thirst, hunger, and mental weariness after my water bottle had been drained hours before. The sandy route was bordered by silver-green trees, their leaves glistening in the wind like coins. Just before my knees gave way under me, I vaguely recognized that there were olive groves. I hardly noticed the collision as the ground came up to meet my face. A peculiar calm swept over me, and darkness edged my eyes. This might have been appropriate. I collapsed alone in one foreign country after my husband abandoned me in another. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the fatigue that had been accumulating ever since Nathan left in his car. Phosm, Kira. I was turned over by old hands after a woman's voice broke through my fog. A face from the past came into focus, with deep creases encircling compassionate eyes that were wide with worry. She patted my cheeks, offered me a canteen, and chatted quickly in Greek. My head continued to spin wildly, but the water gave me enough energy to sit up. She pointed to herself and repeated her name, introducing herself as Maria. Weakly, I imitated her gesture. Clara. Maria supported my weight and helped me stand up, her petite figure surprisingly sturdy. She made walking gestures with her fingers and gestured toward a stone home tucked away amid the olive trees. She led me carefully up the slope, and I nodded, too weak to fight. I entered the farmhouse kitchen, which smelled of something tasty simmering on an old stove and herbs dangling from wooden beams. Maria called out to someone after settling me at a weathered wooden table. The voice of a man answered. Shortly afterward, an old man with a silver mustache and a sun-darkened face emerged in the doorway, using a rag to wipe his hands. Maria said, Nikos, gesturing toward him. Her spouse gave me a cautious nod, his eyes inquisitive but not hostile. Maria placed a bowl of plain soup in my hands after pouring chilled water into a glass. Maria smiled as the scent reached my nose, and I heard my stomach grumble. The evening flew by, due to a breakdown in communication. I made an effort to convey my predicament, using a few words, hand signals, and finally tears. Even though I thought Maria couldn't possibly understand the specifics, she nodded as though she fully understood. Nikos stayed silent but focused, occasionally posing queries that Maria would interpret with gestures. They let me use their spare room, a plain room with whitewashed walls and a small bed with a quilt that was created by hand. I fell into much-needed slumber, too tired to argue. The smell of fresh bread and the crowing of roosters heralded the arrival of morning. At the foot of my bed, I discovered clean garments folded, a basic cotton dress, and a cardigan that appeared to be decades old, but had just been laundered. Although they were a wonderful departure from my vacation attire, they hung loosely on my body. Maria was delighted to see me in the kitchen and promptly brought me strong coffee and freshly baked bread with honey and olive oil. Embarrassment began to creep in as daylight cleared my head. I had been taken in without inquiry by these strangers, fed me, dressed me. I had to give an explanation, make a payment, and go on. I tried to express my appreciation and my plan to go back to the village using bad English and the translation software on my now charged phone, which Nikos had discreetly provided as an adapter. Maria's expression instantly dimmed. With a forceful shake of her head, she gestured to the rain pattering against the windows outside, and then to my still freezing feet. One of the few English words she understood, "Stay," she demanded. "Take a nap." I tried to depart multiple times during the course of the following 3 days, but each time I encountered mild opposition. At one point, Maria stopped me at the door with my shoes on and purse in hand. I felt guilty because of how hurt her face was. She guided me to a tiny wooden box on the mantel by taking my hand. She opened it to discover a pile of pictures. She gestured to a young woman who had Nikos's smile and Maria's eyes, her fingers shaking. "Isadora," she murmured. Then she gestured in the distance. "Australia." She indicated a child by cradling her arms and holding her hand at waist height while her eyes welled with tears. She managed to say, "Grandbaby," pointing to a more current picture of a baby. "No, see." Then I got it. Maria saw me as a replacement for her daughter, someone to fill the need created by her absence. My heart hurt for her loss instead of feeling duped. I gave a slow nod and put my purse back on the door hook. I eventually adapted to their agricultural life, establishing new rituals every day. Maria showed me how to hang laundry so the mountain wind would catch it just perfectly, and how to collect eggs from the hens without frightening them. I learned how to spot weeds in the vegetable garden from Nikos, who was quite patient with me when I pulled up a herb by mistake the first time. The physical nature of the labor was different from my meticulously planned life in Boston, but it was nonetheless fulfilling in ways I had never realized. At first, my body objected because it was used to expensive gyms and regimented workouts. My hands developed new calluses. I started to feel pain in muscles I was unaware I had. But as the days went by, the discomfort subsided and my strength increased. More significantly, the incessant mental cycle of my desertion subsided and was replaced by the more straightforward worries of language acquisition and farm chores. There were times at night when I felt at ease, sitting on the little porch while Nikos smoked his pipe and Maria stitched. The betrayal was still painful. Here, however, amid the old olive trees and the cadence of country living, it started to feel more like an unexpected chapter in my narrative than its conclusion. Maria sat next to me while we shelled field peas 2 weeks after I arrived. With a contemplative look on her face, she asked slowly in her getting better English, "Home? Do you wish to return home?" She pointed to America after making a flying gesture with her hand. I was suddenly struck with the question, "At home?" The word brought to mind our elegant Boston brownstone, complete with well-chosen furnishings and tasteful decor. Additionally, it highlighted Nathan's domineering actions, his helpful handling of our money that prevented me from having autonomy. He subtly undermined my friendships, his contemptuous attitude toward my professional goals. Words came forth in a language Maria couldn't entirely grasp, but the emotions were so universal that tears streamed down my cheeks. I informed her of Nathan's treachery, about years of gradually giving up parts of myself in order to maintain harmony, about the embarrassment of being left behind in a new nation like an unwanted luggage. As I spoke, Maria's worn hand covered mine. After I was done, she gestured to her heart, then to the surrounding farm, and then back to me. It was a clear message. If I wanted it, I had a place here. I answered cautiously, work, imitating Nikos as he tended the olive plants. I remain. I have a job. Like the daybreak over the Aegean, Maria's smile blossomed. She squeezed my hand and nodded, then went back to the peas, as though we had just decided on something as basic as tomorrow's lunch, instead of a total change in my life. I started learning about olive farming when I decided to stay. Even though there were still stars in the sky, Maria woke me up the very next morning and gave me work clothes and thick boots that had once belonged to Isadora. I followed her and Nikos, half sleeping, to the grove, where the old trees were hardly lit by the first glimmer of light. Maria pointed at the branches covered in fruit and said, Elise. She showed how to do it correctly by using wooden rakes to gently comb the trees, releasing the olives onto nets strung out below. Nikos patiently corrected me after my first effort sent twigs and leaves flying down, along with a few valuable olives. By mid-morning, my city-soft hands had the first blisters, my shoulders were burning from effort, and the sun was searing overhead. Boston lady hands, Maria said softly as she looked at my palms. She vanished into the house during lunch and came out with a homemade ointment that had a beeswax and herb scent. As she applied it to my bare skin, the cooling sensation was instantaneous. Better tomorrow, she pledged. Unexpectedly, she was correct. Every day was better. My method improved. My strength increased. My hands became hard. I was able to work side by side with them for hours on end in a matter of weeks, enjoying the increasing amounts of fruit that had been collected. Even more difficult than the harvest was the sorting process. Under the shade of a pergola, we sat at a long table and carefully sorted the olives by quality. The damaged ones were used to make soap, the slightly blemished ones were used for second grade, and the ideal ones were used for premium oil. At first, Maria gave me hawk-eyed attention while gently nudging me to remedy my errors. Her corrections gradually decreased in frequency as my eye grew accustomed to the finer details. You pick things up quickly, she boasted. One evening, Nikos made a statement, and as my crude Greek improved, so did his bad English. His approbation filled my chest with warmth, as it was the highest compliment he had ever given me. I learned in Maria's kitchen as well as in the groves, a location that first alarmed me with its dearth of contemporary amenities. I had thought of myself as a good cook in Boston, able to prepare dinner parties that pleased Nathan's coworkers by following recipes from gourmet publications. However, Maria's cooking relied on years of experience passed down through hands and observation, rather than measuring cups or exact temperatures. Observe, she would say, using well-practiced gestures to knead bread dough. I would attempt to imitate her moves, first failing miserably. My first loaves came out of the outside stone oven crooked and either burned to a crisp or underbaked. Maria urged me to practice, shattering even my worst attempts to taste them all. Education is not a waste. I found her acceptance of flaws to be revolutionary. Errors had not been a sign of mastery in my former life, but rather something to conceal. Their meal's simplicity exposed the extent of the processing in my American diet. Everything at this place came from nearby farms or their own land. Cheese from goats down the road, eggs that morning, and veggies that were still warm from the sun. Other than the addition of lemon, olive oil, and herbs from Maria's garden, the tastes were clear and bright. This diet and exercise routine caused a difference in my body. As extra weight vanished and was replaced by lean muscle, the fashionable clothes I had brought became looser. Simple olive oil soap and sincere perspiration restored my complexion, which had previously been preserved by costly creams. A stranger glanced back when I saw myself in the tiny mirror above the bathroom sink. Tanned, more powerful. Though it weighed less, it seemed somehow more substantial. Maria and I discovered other methods to interact outside of work and food as my Greek vocabulary grew. She pulled out her photo albums during evening breaks, pointing to black and white pictures from her village childhood. I was shocked to learn that she had previously taught in a school before marrying and going back to work in her family's olive business. She posed the question while imitating keyboarding. I pulled out my phone and showed her pictures of my premarital interior design work, which Nathan had written off as a pastime. Maria pointed to things she loved and made sounds of gratitude as she looked at them with real attention. She tapped her temple and remarked, "Beautiful thinking." I was moved to tears by her affirmation of my artistic endeavors. Nathan had progressively distanced himself from such basic recognition as our marriage developed. Maria taught me how to knit one rainy afternoon. She was incredibly patient with me while I made uneven rows and dropped stitches. A basic scarf created entirely by hand was my first finished product. It was lumpy and uneven. The luxury cashmere Nathan had bought me for Christmas made me feel more proud than ever as I draped it around my neck. Other handcrafted items came next. A clay cup that Nikos helped shape. A neighbor taught me how to weave a basket. Hours of connection and education were symbolized by each item, carrying tales that no riches could ever buy. Never could. As my attachment to material perfection waned, so did my collection. One morning, with Nikos by her side, Maria came up to me after 3 months of working for nothing more than room and board. They showed me the tiny inventory they made from our harvest and escorted me to the small building where they processed and bottled their olive oil. With a gesture toward the calendar, Maria declared Market Day. You come. Locals and the occasional visitor peruse the stalls at the lively village market where farmers and craftspeople showcase their wares. Bottles of golden green oil, olive soap, and jars of preserved olives were arranged on Maria and Nikos's plain table. They put me at the head of the table, which surprised me and encouraged me to talk to customers. There were times of bewilderment and hilarity due to my bad Greek and their limited command of English, but sales increased gradually throughout the day. Maria gave me an envelope filled with euros as the market was closing. Simply your part, she said. Equal pay for equal work. I gazed at the small amount, maybe enough for one supper, at the eateries Nathan and I used to frequent. However, this money was something I hadn't had for years. Autonomy, earned by my own efforts. There are no conditions. No subliminal demands of appreciation or obedience. Fair remuneration for sincere labor. I put the envelope beneath my pillow that night, reaching out to touch it every now and again, as though to make sure it was real. Over the course of our 10 years together, Nathan had progressively taken charge of our money in an effort to streamline things, giving me credit cards connected to accounts he kept an eye on. Rebuilding a life that was entirely mine was made possible by this little pile of euros. As I started to nod off, I became aware of something surprising. Nathan hadn't even crossed my mind on market day. The pride in our creations, the satisfaction of participating, and Greek terms for transactions had consumed my thoughts too much. The place he had once held in my mind had diminished, to be replaced by kitchen classes, olive orchards, and the increasing confidence that I could do far more than he had ever let me think. The week after, for the first time since I arrived, Maria and Nikos invited me to supper in the village square's taverna. I was wearing a blouse Maria had lent me, and I was apprehensive as we walked inside the busy store. After enthusiastically embracing the pair, Nikos, the owner, turned to look at me with interest. Maria proudly said, "Our American," in Greek, a phrase I had come to understand. With a kind grin, Nikos guided us to what was obviously their usual table. I felt something blossom inside of me over platters of grilled fish and village wine, something I hadn't given myself permission to dream for in a long time. A sense of belonging. Nikos spoke carefully in English after clearing his throat. "Clara, we would like to discuss business with you." I was surprised at how serious he was. Had I erred in some way? Had I reached the point of no return? After giving me a comforting pat on the hand across the table, Maria picked up where her husband had left off. We're getting old. 68, 70 years, she remarked, gesturing to Nikos. There are no kids present. Isadora is not returning. Nikos gave a serious nod. We anticipate retiring shortly, 2 or 3 years. However, olive trees, he gestured sweepingly, 2 centuries old. Young hands are needed. I started to realize, and my breath caught. Maria's eyes wrinkled at the corners as she grinned. You pick things up quickly, put forth a lot of effort. Everything is taught by us. Then, as though presenting something intangible but precious, she opened her hands. Your business. I was astounded by the proposal. Even though I was a stranger who had just recently entered their life, they hardly knew me, but here they were, promising a future I had never dared to dream about. I stumbled, but I don't know enough. The business side, the pressing issues, the trees. You learn, Nikos asserted. We instruct, don't hurry. That was the first night of my real apprenticeship. I became the heir to generations of wisdom, not just an extra set of hands. Nikos showed me various parts of their orchards every morning, explaining how different soil types impacted taste profiles, how to spot illness early, and when to harvest each portion for the best oil quality. Maria concentrated on showing me the company's records, which included both handwritten ledgers and simple spreadsheets their grandson had created on a computer while on vacation years prior. Although it worked, her system for keeping track of her income and expenses was antiquated. I spent hours improving their systems, seeing a chance to do more than just physical labor, and producing digital records that simplified inventory and sales monitoring. One evening, I showed Maria how to filter the spreadsheet to display which oil types sold best at which marketplaces. Patterns appeared in the numbers, and her eyes grew wide. Wise, she said with a nod of approval. A Boston woman with a sharp mind is good for business. With their approval, I started making minor adjustments to my marketing. The tags on our hand-labeled bottles were updated with details about food pairings and flavor characteristics, which I had learned from Maria's many cooking classes. In order to address the issues that visitors regularly asked at our market stand, I made a straightforward pamphlet regarding their traditional practices. My growing proficiency in Greek aided in establishing relationships outside of Maria and Nikos's close social group. Maria's blood pressure prescription was filled by a pharmacist who started visiting our market booth for discussions that went beyond business. I accepted the baker's wife's invitation to attend her monthly coffee parties with other village women, which was a daunting but beneficial opportunity to learn the language and traditions of the area. When Nikos from the taverna started showcasing our premium oil as a table offering and conspicuously placed little cards with our new labels on each table, he turned into an unexpected ally. Well done. When I thanked him, he winked and said, good for me. Word got out. Soon after, we received inquiries from 2 more eateries in nearby towns regarding supplying their establishments. I've been in my new life for 6 months. My first official village celebration was the butcher's granddaughter's christening, which I attended. I had a lump in my throat as I watched the community rite take place in the back of the tiny church. As soon as he saw me, the old priest stopped talking in the limited English he had learned in Athens Seminary to greet me. With his rheumy eyes sparkling, he remarked, "You give Old Grove new life. Good for the village. Young folks depart for America, for Athens. The village needs fresh blood." The final obstacle appeared to be lifted by his acceptance. After that, invitations were more open for everything from name day festivities to spontaneous beach get-togethers to a village committee meeting on the summer festival. Every incident added a new thread to the network of relationships that kept me in place. One buddy in particular was Daphne, the weaver, whose booth was next to ours at the weekly market. She was a young widower in her 40s with a sardonic sense of humor and a realistic perspective that made me think of my college roommate. Our discussions, which were held in her superb English and my developing Greek, covered everything from business tactics to local rumors to more introspective topics. As we packed away our unsold items one calm afternoon, she noticed, you never speak of America. Is there family there? Friends? I was surprised by the question. I had forgotten about my previous life since I was so preoccupied with creating my new one. My parents passed away many years ago, a couple of buddies, but as I trailed off, I became aware of how Nathan had progressively cut me off from my support system. I was constantly coming up with excuses for why my coworkers took advantage of me or why my college pals were overly theatrical. Daphne gave a knowing nod. You never mentioned the name of the husband who abandoned you in Italy. Nathan, I said. After being silent for months, the syllables felt strange on my tongue. Nathan is his name, and he didn't look for you. After months of Maria and Nikos tactfully avoiding the subject, her candor was welcome. I'm not sure, I said. I didn't look at my phone. I made a hazy gesture. I had periodically turned it on to snap pictures, but I had stopped using my American social media and email accounts because I didn't want to face whatever may be there. Daphne challenged me with a raised eyebrow. Maybe it's time to search. Not for him. For you. To correctly close the door. I remembered what she said. After assisting Maria with dinner that night, I retired to my room and turned on my old phone. I logged into my long-neglected email account and connected to the farmhouse's basic Wi-Fi. I logged in with shaking fingers. The screen was crowded with hundreds of unread messages. I looked through the senders and saw a number from old acquaintances, with subject lines that changed from informal check-ins to serious questions. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I was as completely absent from their lives as I had been from Nathan's, and I had no explanation. I noticed a message from my old Caroline Hayes that had a job possibility and progressively more frantic follow-ups. When I opened it, I saw that she had suggested me for a remote consulting job with a company that sells sustainable building materials. Just 2 weeks prior, the last email said that if I was interested, the position was still open. Another email sender froze my fingers on the computer before I could think about this unexpected link to my past life. I know where you are, Nathan Davis. It had arrived mere hours ago according to the timestamp. With a racing heart, I clicked it open. Hey, Clara. After months with the help of a private detective, I was able to locate you back in Greece. We've had enough of this. I'll take you home and put an end to this absurd outburst. On Thursday, my plane touches down in Athens. Prepare yourself. In 3 days, panic and rage clashed in my chest, and the room whirled around me. What does he dare do? After leaving me, after months of silence, he thought he could just pick me up like lost luggage. With the phone tightly gripped in my fingers, I staggered downstairs. Maria's smile faded when she noticed my reaction as she glanced up from the account ledger strewn across the kitchen table. She said softly, "Bad news from America?" Instead, "Nathan, all I could manage. He's coming here. Thursday." Maria's eyes squinted a little. She extracted an envelope from under the ledger and slid it over the table in my direction. Good timing, then. Was waiting for right moment. I discovered legal documents with both Maria's and Nikos's names on them. Greek text with translations into English. Partnership agreement, Maria clarified. 1/3 business. Years now, not future. Now, as I looked at the document and realized its importance, tears clouded my vision. A real collaboration, not just a job or apprenticeship. A basis to build upon, not merely a place to stay. Not charity, but just praise. Maria tapped the papers firmly and added, "You decide what happens Thursday. You have home here, business here, friends here." She gestured at the phone I was holding. That man, he no longer decides. Her comment's veracity enveloped me like a blanket of assurance. I felt like I was grounded, not simply existing, for the first time since I was left in that Italian town. Nathan would arrive. However, the lady he would find would be significantly different from the one he had left behind. The days that followed were a haze of getting ready, Not what Nathan would anticipate. Emotional fortification, instead of packing suitcases and saying goodbye with tears. I went to see Lydia, the sole attorney in the village, who assisted me in creating divorce documents in both Greek and English. I reached out to my former Caroline Hayes and hesitantly agreed to the remote consulting position. I even sent quick explanations and no apologies in emails to people I had left behind. The Greek summer sky was clear and brilliant when Thursday arrived. The afternoon silence was broken by the strange sound of a rental car engine when Nikos and I were examining samples of olive oil in the processing shed. Maria emerged at the doorway, her face a mix of resolution and worry. Simply, "He is here," she said. I cleaned my hands on my work apron and went outside while hammering. Nathan, wearing fashionable sunglasses on top of his neatly styled hair, stood next to a slick silver automobile and looked at the modest farmhouse with obvious disgust. I knew his casual yet costly travel attire from many business trips. A button-down shirt and tailored chinos that likely cost more than a week's worth of our olive oil profits. At first, he didn't see me, which gave me valuable time to gather my thoughts. Against the background of the aged stone buildings and old olive trees that had become my home, this man, who had once been the center of my universe, suddenly appeared somehow smaller and less real. "Nathan," I called, sounding more composed than I had anticipated. The amazement that registered on his face was almost funny when he turned. His gaze moved from my work boots to my sun-brown arms before resting on my messy hair in a straightforward chignon. I saw his features struggle with recognition incredulously. "Claire, my God, how did you fare?" The tone of disapproval that used to send me running to correct whatever it was that he found wrong now just swept over me like a tsunami against rock. "Life happened," I said, approaching him cautiously. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" His rehearsed charm slid into place as he extended his arms and took off his sunglasses. "Naturally, I've come to take you home. Don't you think this has continued long enough? Whatever you were attempting to say." I cut him off by halting well out of his reach and saying, "This isn't about making a point. This has to do with creating a life." His grin wavered. I heard Maria and Nikos coming out of the house behind me, shuffling quietly. Despite their inability to comprehend what we were saying, they placed themselves in plain sight, silent protectors, prepared to step in if necessary. Nathan's face hardened when he saw them. "Have you been residing with these people? Have you been detained here? Because if so," I interrupted, "they've been teaching me about growing olives, about the community, about being kind without any restrictions." I pointed to the groves that surrounded us. "I now own a portion of it. Here I run a business." His expression changed from disbelief to the disdain I was all too familiar with. "A company? Be serious, Clara. You're not a farmer. You're a designer. This is the eat, pray, love time, right? I acknowledge that I shouldn't have abandoned you in Italy after our altercation. It was a foolish, inebriated error. I'm sorry. It's time to return home now. You've expressed regret." I repeated, "When? How can finding me and insisting that I come back be considered an act of apology?" The appeal evaporated as his jaw tightened. "All right. I apologize for abandoning you in Italy. It was wrong and immature. Do you want to hear that? Is it time for us to get over this?" "Nathan, why did you search for me at all? Months have passed. Why now?" He shuffled uneasily, looking at the old couple who were observing us closely. "Can we talk about this in private? Maybe in the car?" "I have nothing to conceal from them, and they don't speak English." "Why now?" His shoulders drooped a bit. "Your folks have been phoning. At occasions, friends will ask questions. When clients come to visit, they ask why you're not there. It appears to be." He walked away. "Unfortunately for your reputation," I concluded for him. He snapped, "Your reputation, our reputation, back, our life together. The one we built over 10 years of marriage." I retorted, "The one you built." The one where I gradually became nothing more than an accessory to your success. Tell me, Nathan, did you even notice how unhappy I was before Italy? Did you care? His face grew serious. We had a good life, Clara. A beautiful home, financial security, respect in the community. What more could you possibly want? Purpose, connection, agency over my own choices. Behind me, I pointed to the little stone home. I found all three here, in a place you dismiss as primitive and backward. He demanded, "This isn't you," with a hint of desperation in his voice. The Claro I know wouldn't choose manual labor and poverty over comfort and position. I grinned as I realized how true what he was saying was. You're right. The Clara you knew wouldn't have. But that woman died in Italy when her husband abandoned her as a joke. The woman standing before you made different choices. At that moment, Maria came over and pressed the partnership agreement we had signed into my hand. She sensed that the time had come, even though she was unable to follow our instructions. I held the document toward Nathan after unfolding it. I have legal ties here now. A business partnership. Responsibilities to people who value me for my contributions, not my appearance or social connections. Anger made his face flush. This is ridiculous. Whatever game you're playing. It's not a game, I answered, taking the envelope Lydia had prepared out of my pocket. These are divorce papers, Nathan, already filed, with provisions for division of assets. As though it could burn him, he gazed at the envelope. You can't be serious. You'd throw away everything for this. He pointed to the small farm in a contemptuous manner. I'm not throwing away anything. I'm choosing something better. Something real. I took a step closer and put the envelope in his stiff hand. You left me, Nathan. You drove away laughing. You just never expected I'd find my way without you. His expression alternated between disbelief, rage, and finally wounded pride as his fingers instinctively wrapped around the documents. He said, "You'll regret this." Even to his own ears, however, the threat seemed vacuous. When the novelty wears off, and you're still hauling olives in the hot sun at 60, you'll remember what you gave up. Maybe I let out, but I'd rather risk regret from choices I made than live with the certainty of regret from choices made for me. Then Nick moved nearer and touched my shoulder with a rough hand. Despite his inability to comprehend our conversation, he was able to deduce the conclusion from our body language. His tone was stern, but not harsh, as he spoke to Nathan in Greek. Nathan said in a softer tone, "What did he say?" He said the road back to Athens is dangerous after dark. You should leave now to reach the city before nightfall. Nathan eventually realized that this was neither a rescue nor a negotiation as he glanced between us. It was a farewell. Without saying another word, he grabbed the divorce papers and drove back to his rented car. Maria put her hand in mine as the car vanished down the dusty road. The three of us turned toward the home together. Now my home, too. There was work to be done this evening, including cataloging oil samples, preparing dinner, and checking the market inventory for tomorrow. Once my spouse left me in a distant country, thinking I wouldn't be able to support myself without him, assuming that after I'd learnt my lesson, I'd come crawling back. Rather, I had discovered a rich soil in which to establish new roots, deeper and more robust than he could have ever dreamed. The greatest gifts are sometimes the results of the cruelest deeds. Nathan had unintentionally released me in an attempt to break me. And peace, not rage, was ultimately the sweetest form of retaliation. I didn't have to yell at him, prove anything, or get his attention again. I simply needed to rebuild in silence, and according to my own rules. I hope you keep in mind that you have the right to start afresh if you have ever been deceived. Establish limits. Heal up. And if you have to make amends, do it by leading a life that is so honest and full that it speaks for itself. Have you ever used suffering to gain control? Tell your tale below, and collectively, let's heal. Furthermore, tell me what freedom means to you.